"Get her out of my office, now." Evangeline Moss said it loud enough that every client at every desk turned to look, and the kid at reception forgot about the phone in his hand. She was behind her glass desk in a cream blazer and ivory slacks, finger pointed at Wilhelmina Drake like she was pointing out something unpleasant. Wilhelmina was 74. Blue jacket, buttoned all the way up. Flat black shoes. She looked back at Evangeline and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The leather folder under her arm held 40 years of paperwork, proving she owned the floor Evangeline was standing on, the building above it, and every lease and license inside it. Evangeline had just made the most expensive mistake of her career, and about 30 people were standing there watching her make it. Welcome to Frost Folktales. We tell stories about people who got underestimated, written off, talked down to, and decided not to take it quietly. If that's your kind of channel, subscribe. Tuesday morning, early autumn. Clear sky, strong sun. The kind of light that falls through glass walls and makes everything inside look important and alive. It came through the south-facing windows of Hargrove Tower and lit up the marble floor of Pinnacle Realty like a stage, which is about right, because in a few minutes that's basically what it was. Wilhelmina Drake walked in at 9:47. Not in a hurry. The pace of a woman who knows where she's going and doesn't owe anyone an explanation. Pressed jacket, quiet shoes, folder under her left arm where she always kept it. She was there about a disputed lease. Nothing dramatic. She hadn't called ahead because she'd never had to call ahead to walk into one of her own buildings. Pinnacle Realty had the whole south-facing ground floor. Glass partitions, polished desks, marble, light pouring in. At 9:47 it was full, 30 people inside, clients in nice clothes across from agents, a young couple by the window with a printed floor plan between them, an older woman in a yellow blouse near reception with a folder of her own, phones, keyboards, the regular noise of a busy office. Wilhelmina walked up to the front desk, gave her name to the kid on the phone, and asked where the lease management office was. That's as far as she got. Evangeline Moss was 31. Dressed like someone walking into a meeting she'd already decided the outcome of. Cream blazer, ivory slacks, heels that added something she didn't need. She spotted Wilhelmina at reception on her way across the floor, and her face changed. Not curious, not surprised, just annoyed. She came over with her finger already up, like she'd decided the case before hearing it. Who let her in? The voice was meant to carry, and it did. Every head within 20 feet turned. This isn't a senior center. She must have wandered in off the street. The room went quiet. All at once, the way it goes quiet when something ugly happens in public, and everyone in it realizes at the same second that they're now part of it. The receptionist froze with the phone at his ear. 2 junior agents stopped typing. The couple at the window looked up. The woman in the yellow blouse lowered her folder. Nobody moved. Wilhelmina didn't either. She stood where she was, folder under her arm, and looked at Evangeline with a calm that was almost unnerving to watch. No embarrassment, no anger, nothing quick or sharp. Something else, something in her eyes that was older and quieter, and considerably more dangerous than offense. Not that Evangeline was reading her. Evangeline was watching the crowd, so she kept going. That's what people like her do when they've got a crowd, a target, and no idea who they're talking to. Her voice went up another notch, more for the room now than for Wilhelmina. I don't know how you got past the door, but this is a professional real estate office. We have clients here. She swept her finger around the room like she was making a point in court. If you need directions, the concierge desk is in the main lobby. This space isn't for walk-ins. Walk-ins. That was the word she used. The retired woman in the yellow blouse drew a slow breath. The young couple exchanged a look. One of the frozen junior agents, A young woman in an orange top named Amara Patel dropped her eyes to her desk and pressed her lips together. Wilhelmina Drake said nothing. She did not explain herself. She did not produce the documents from her folder and lay them on the desk like a rebuttal. She stood and she listened and she looked, and then she turned her gaze from Evangeline Moss's face to the room around her, a slow, comprehensive sweep that took in every witness, every turned head, every wide eye, and she filed all of it away somewhere deep and deliberate behind those calm, unreadable eyes. Evangeline reached for the phone on the reception desk and said 2 words into it: security. Now, Theodore Grant arrived 90 seconds later from the service corridor at the back of the ground floor. He was a broad, careful man in his 50s, short-sleeved security uniform pressed neat, hair gone mostly gray at the temples, and he arrived with the professional composure of someone who handles difficult situations daily and reads rooms for a living. He read this room in approximately 4 seconds. The woman standing at the reception desk was elderly. She was composed. She was holding a leather document folder with the practiced ease of someone who carries important things. She had not raised her voice. She had not created any disturbance of her own making. Theodore Grant looked at her, and something behind his eyes went uncertain in a way that his face did not quite show. "Ma'am," Evangeline said, voice clipped and final. "Mr. Grant is going to show you out." Theodore Grant moved to Wilhelmina Drake's side. He did not touch her. He stood beside her and gestured with one hand toward the glass doors, and the discomfort on his face was visible to anyone paying attention, and almost everyone in that lobby was paying very close attention. What happened next was the thing that no one in that room forgot. Wilhelmina Drake shifted the leather document folder more firmly under her arm. She straightened, which was the wrong word because she had not been anything other than straight, but something in her bearing settled and became more itself, and the room registered it without being able to name it. Then she walked, not shuffled, not retreated, walked with the measured, unbothered cadence of a woman who is going somewhere she has chosen to go, through a space she has every right to occupy. Her black shoes were quiet on the marble. Her blue jacket did not wrinkle. Her chin was level. She crossed the entire length of the lobby floor, past the junior agents and the frozen clients and the young couple and the woman in the yellow blouse, and every set of eyes in the room followed her, and not one person said a word. At the glass door she stopped. She turned around. She looked back across the lobby at Evangeline Moss, who was already turning away with the small, satisfied posture of someone who believes they have handled something. And then Wilhelmina Drake looked at her, really looked, with those deep, quiet eyes, and what was in that look was not anger, and was not grief, and was not the face of a woman who has been wounded. It was something far more precise than any of those things. It was the expression of someone who already knows exactly what happens next, and is simply letting the current chapter finish. No one who was in that lobby that morning would be able to describe the look adequately when they were later asked to describe it, but every one of them remembered it, every single one. Wilhelmina Drake pushed through the glass door and stepped out into the natural daylight. The sun was full and direct, the autumn air cool and clean, Hargrove Tower rising behind her in glass and steel against a clear sky. She stood on the sidewalk for exactly the span of 3 slow breaths. Then she reached into the inside pocket of her blue jacket and drew out a slim phone. She scrolled to a contact she had not dialed in several years. She pressed call. It rang twice. Rosalind. Her voice was the same as it had been in the lobby, steady, unhurried, carrying the weight of complete and total certainty. Pull everything. Today, she ended the call. She tucked the phone back into her pocket. She looked up at the tower above her tower, every beam and bolt and square foot of it, and she began to walk. 40 years of quiet, documented, irrefutable power had just been asked to speak. Before we go any further, before we watch the machinery of consequence begin to turn, before we follow Evangeline Moss through her celebratory afternoon and Theodore Grant through his quiet dawning horror, we need to go back. 40 years back, because you cannot fully understand what happened in that lobby on Tuesday morning until you understand the woman who walked across that marble floor. And to understand Wilhelmina Drake, you have to start at the beginning, not the polished version, the real one. The year is 1984. Hargrove City's East Side is not a place where people are building empires. It is a place where people are surviving them. Wilhelmina Drake is 34 years old, and she is sitting at a rented desk inside a two-room office above a dry cleaning shop on Caldwell Avenue. The overhead fluorescents flicker twice every hour. The second room has a window that does not quite close. She has $4,000 in a business checking account, a real estate license she studied for while working a full-time administrative position at a logistics company, and a handwritten list of 11 properties that every other agent in Hargrove City has declined to pursue. Properties in neighborhoods banks would not lend in. Properties with title complications that required hours of research instead of hours of selling. Properties dismissed as unsellable by people who did not want to do the work. Wilhelmina Drake wanted to do the work. Her first property acquisition is a narrow commercial storefront on Marcellus Street, 3 blocks from the dry cleaning shop, purchased for $17,000 through a seller who accepted terms no bank had offered because Wilhelmina negotiated them herself, sitting at a folding table with her documentation stacked in 3 neat folders, her voice measured, her numbers exact. She spent 4 months finding a tenant for that storefront, a woman named Etta Caswell, who wanted to open an alterations shop and had been turned away from every commercial space on the north side. Wilhelmina Drake leased it to her at fair market rate, witnessed the agreement personally, and filed a copy in a red accordion folder that she labeled with the property address and the date. That accordion folder was the beginning of the archive. By 1989, Drake Property Group, still a 2-person operation, Wilhelmina and a part-time bookkeeper named Vincent, holds 6 properties. By 1993, it holds 19. Each acquisition follows the same pattern: deep research, patient negotiation, documentation that is signed twice, witnessed, and filed. Not because anyone required it of her, because Wilhelmina Drake understood early and completely that the world would look for reasons to dispute what she built, and she intended to give them none. The bank loan officers were the most consistent teachers in this regard. There was one, a man named Braddock, barrel-chested and dismissive, at First Central Hargrove, who laughed at her across his desk in the spring of 1991. Not a polite laugh, a laugh that said, "Who do you think you are, and why are you in my office?" She had come in for a commercial acquisition loan. The numbers were sound. Her payment history was impeccable. Braddock laughed, shuffled her documents back across the desk without fully reading them, and told her she was welcome to try another institution. She went home. She sat at her kitchen table under the overhead light until past midnight. She reran every number. She revised the presentation. She found a cosigner, a retired accountant named Gerald Reese, who had done business with her before and believed in the numbers. She came back to First Central Hargrove with a package so thoroughly documented that Braddock's supervisor approved it in 11 minutes and apologized for the previous meeting. Braddock was not in the room for that meeting. Wilhelmina Drake noted that fact, smiled, and shook the supervisor's hand. She never needed a cosigner again. The human cost of those years is not a footnote. It deserves its own accounting. Her husband, a kind and patient man named Leonard Drake, weathered the 80-hour weeks with a quiet that eventually became a different kind of silence. They separated in 1995, civilly, without bitterness, 2 people who loved each other and had arrived at a fork in the road at different speeds. Leonard Drake remained in Hargrove City. He attended Cyrus Drake's school events when Wilhelmina was out of state at a closing. They remained somehow friends, but the marriage did not survive what building an empire requires, and Wilhelmina Drake carried that knowledge without allowing it to stop her, because stopping was not a language she had ever fully learned. Cyrus Drake spent portions of his childhood doing homework on his mother's office floor. Not because she was neglectful, because he refused to go to the sitter. He wanted to be where she was. He would spread his workbooks across the industrial carpet, pencil in hand, and look up occasionally to watch her on the phone or reviewing documents under the fluorescent light above. And something about watching her work settled something in him. He became a corporate attorney. No one who knew Wilhelmina Drake was surprised. The Hargrove Tower parcel. This is the piece the story turns on, so it deserves its full weight. In 2002, a vacant lot at the corner of Hargrove and Meridian is listed for commercial sale. The lot has been vacant for 9 years. It has a complicated history, a previous development project that collapsed in litigation, a title dispute that took 3 years to resolve, environmental assessments that scared off 2 separate developers. Every commercial real estate firm in the city reviewed it and passed. The listing sat. The lot sat. Weeds grew through the chain-link fence surrounding it. People stopped looking at it. Wilhelmina Drake looked at it for 2 years before she moved. She hired an environmental consultant. She hired a title specialist. She reviewed the litigation history herself, line by line, sitting at her mahogany desk on Saturday mornings, with the skylight above her office, flooding the room with clean morning light. She found the path through. She purchased the Hargrove Tower parcel in the spring of 2004 for a price that made her competitors, when they eventually learned of it, physically uncomfortable. Not because she underpaid, but because she had done the work they had refused to do, and the reward for that work was the corner lot at Hargrove and Meridian, at a price that reflected years of avoidance by everyone else. Construction began in 2006. The tower took 4 years to complete. Wilhelmina Drake was on site every week during construction, not as a ceremonial presence, but working, reviewing schedules, meeting with contractors, signing documents, and keeping copies. When a subcontractor attempted to substitute lower-grade materials in the 3rd year of construction, she caught it in a line-item review at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, made 3 calls before sunrise, and had the substitution reversed before the work crew arrived the next morning. The project manager later said he had never worked with anyone who read every single page of every single contract. He said it with admiration. He also said it with something that resembled mild fear. By the time Hargrove Tower was completed in 2010, Wilhelmina Drake was 58 years old. She stood on the rooftop terrace on the morning of the opening. The skyline of Hargrove City spread out below her, the morning light coming in clean and wide across the upper floors. And she allowed herself 10 minutes of stillness, just 10. Then she went back downstairs and started thinking about what came next. What came next was a deliberate decision, and it is the decision that the story of that Tuesday morning ultimately hinges on. Wilhelmina Drake had watched the real estate industry long enough to understand something about visibility. Specifically, that certain kinds of visibility invite certain kinds of aggression. She had been underestimated her entire career. She had been laughed at, dismissed, redirected, delayed, and on 4 separate documented occasions denied services she was fully qualified to receive. She had beaten every single one of those obstacles through documentation, patience, and work. But she was 58, and she had earned the right to choose how she engaged. She made a strategic decision to license the Pinnacle Realty brand to operate the real estate office inside Hargrove Tower. The franchise agreement was specific, thorough, and entirely in her favor, as every agreement she had ever signed tended to be. Pinnacle Realty got the brand exposure, the floor space, and the client traffic. Drake Property Group retained the building, the operating license, every lease, and the parent company relationship that made the whole arrangement possible. Wilhelmina Drake's name was not on the front door. It was on every deed, every title, and every clause of the franchise agreement that Pinnacle Realty signed without reading carefully enough. She stepped back from the public face of the business. She watched quietly. She trusted the archive and the system that Rosalind Obi eventually digitized into something that could be accessed from anywhere in the world within 4 minutes of a request. Every document, every lease, every license, every original agreement, signed twice, witnessed, dated, and filed. 40 years of proof. Now it is Tuesday afternoon, and Wilhelmina Drake is at her mahogany desk in her home office. The natural skylight above floods the room with clean, steady light. The kind of light that does not flicker, does not apologize, does not waver. Documents are spread across the desk in organized clusters. Her leather document folder, the same one she carried into Pinnacle Realty this morning, the same one she tucked more firmly under her arm before she walked with her head level toward the door, sits to her left, closed now. Her hands are folded. Her expression is the same expression that everyone in that lobby saw when she paused at the glass door and looked back at Evangeline Moss. Calm, unreadable, carrying something that runs far deeper than offense. Her phone is on the desk beside her. Rosalind Obi is already on the line. Her voice comes through steady and certain, confirming what Wilhelmina Drake already knows. The files are pulled, all of them. 40 years of documented, witnessed, signed, and cataloged proof that this building, this business, and every lease Evangeline Moss ever put her signature to belongs, has always belonged, to Wilhelmina Drake. There is a silence on the line between them, not an uncomfortable one. The silence of two women who have worked side by side long enough to understand what comes next, without needing to say it. Then Wilhelmina Drake uncaps her pen and she begins. By 11:15 that Tuesday morning, Evangeline Moss was already laughing. She stood at the center of Pinnacle Realty's open floor plan, the overhead fluorescence blazing above her like a stage light she had installed for herself. One hand on her hip and the other cutting through the air in a slow theatrical arc. Two junior agents, Derek and Simone, the ones who always orbited her desk when things were slow, leaned against a filing cabinet grinning while Evangeline performed the morning's highlight reel for the 3rd time. And she just... Evangeline bent slightly at the waist, rounding her shoulders, shuffling her feet 2 inches forward in a cruel pantomime of an old woman's walk. She just stood there, holding this little folder like she was waiting for a bus. She straightened up, tossing her cream blazer's collar flat with one hand. I said to her, this is a professional real estate office, not a senior center. You want a bus schedule? Try the lobby of the building next door. Derek laughed first. Simone followed half a second later. Evangeline smiled the way people smile when they know they are the most entertaining person in the room and have stopped questioning whether they deserve to be. She picked up her phone from the glass desk, scrolled briefly, and set it back down without reading anything. 30 feet away, at a desk positioned along the east wall of the floor, Amara Patel had not laughed once. She was staring at her computer screen, but she had stopped working 7 minutes ago. The spreadsheet she was supposed to be updating sat untouched, its cells blinking patiently, while her right hand rested on the mouse doing nothing at all. She had pulled up a search browser in a second window and typed 2 names into the search field with the quiet, unhurried focus of someone who needed to be sure before they said anything or did anything or moved at all. Wilhelmina Drake. Drake Property Group. The results loaded in under 2 seconds. The first result was a business journal profile. The second was a real estate industry directory listing. The third was a news archive article from 2019. And Amara clicked that one first because the thumbnail showed a photograph of a woman standing in front of a building she recognized immediately. The woman in the photograph was wearing a blue jacket. She was standing in front of Hargrove Tower, not inside it, but outside it. At street level, one hand resting on the stone column at the main entrance, with the quiet familiarity of someone who puts their hand on that column every single time they walk through that door. The caption below the photograph read, "Wilhelmina Drake, founder and principal of Drake Property Group, photographed outside Hargrove Tower, the crown jewel of her commercial portfolio, during the company's 40th anniversary celebrations." Amara Patel read the caption twice. Then she clicked the Business Journal profile. The profile was thorough. 4 columns, a sidebar listing Drake Property Group's holdings, which Amara scanned from top to bottom with the slow, absorbing attention of someone reading a document that keeps becoming more significant the further down the page they go. Commercial properties across 3 counties, residential developments, 2 historic renovation projects cited by the city's preservation board, and there, third from the bottom of the asset column, 5 words she did not need to read a second time because they registered on the first pass with the clean, terrible clarity of a fire alarm in a quiet building. Hargrove Tower, sole ownership, Drake Property Group. Amara lifted her eyes from the screen across the open floor. Evangeline Moss was on the phone now, feet propped on the edge of her desk, laughing at something a client had said. Her ivory slacks were perfectly pressed. Her voice carried the easy, unhurried confidence of someone who had not yet received any information that might change the pitch or pace of their afternoon. She was describing a property on Ashford Lane. She was using words like premier and turnkey and motivated seller. She was completely, catastrophically at ease. Amara looked back at the screen. She looked at the photograph of Wilhelmina Drake's hand on the column of the building they were all sitting inside. At this exact moment, she looked back at Evangeline Moss. She said nothing. Not yet. Her mouth opened slightly and then closed, because there was no version of this conversation she was prepared to have out loud in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, with Evangeline Moss's laughter still bouncing off the glass walls. There was no clean, safe way to walk across 30 feet of office floor and say what the screen in front of her was saying in plain, documented print. She needed to think. She needed to be sure she understood what she was looking at before she turned it into words and handed it to someone who might not handle it carefully. So Amara Patel did what careful people do when the situation is larger than they are ready to manage. She opened a new document, typed 3 lines of notes, saved it under a file name that looked like nothing, Q3 Client Follow-Up MISC, and minimized the window. Then she pulled the spreadsheet back to the front of her screen and pretended to work, while Evangeline Moss laughed on the phone 40 feet away and the overhead fluorescence hummed above all of them without any regard for what was about to happen. In the basement of Hargrove Tower, the security office was a long rectangular room with no windows, its ceiling fitted with a grid of fluorescent panels that gave the space the flat, even brightness of a room that did not believe in shadows. Theodore Grant had worked in this room for 11 years. He knew the sound the lights made when one of the panels was nearing the end of its cycle, a faint, intermittent flicker in the 3rd panel from the left. And this afternoon that panel was flickering, and he had not gotten up to file a maintenance request the way he normally would have, because he was sitting very still in his chair in front of a desk monitor, and he had been sitting that way for nearly 20 minutes. He had escorted the woman out at approximately 9:47. He remembered the time because he had glanced at the wall clock when Evangeline Moss raised her voice, a reflex from years of incident documentation. He remembered the way the woman had looked at him when he arrived at her side, not frightened, not angry, not confused, just steady, like she was giving him the opportunity to reconsider and had already decided she would not shame him for the choice he was about to make. He had touched her elbow gently and said, "Ma'am," and she had walked beside him with her leather document folder tucked under her arm and her black shoes making a deliberate, unhurried sound on the marble floor. She had not argued. She had not raised her voice. She had paused at the glass door and looked back at Evangeline Moss with an expression Theodore Grant had been turning over in his mind for the better part of 4 hours now, because it was not the expression of a woman who had been defeated. It was the expression of a woman who had just finished taking a very complete inventory of something. He had gone back to his post. He had written the incident in his log. Unauthorized visitor removed from client floor. No incident. And then around 1 in the afternoon, sitting alone in the basement office while his partner covered the lobby, something had begun to bother him in a way he could not precisely name. A low-frequency discomfort. The kind that came not from having done something violent or loud, but from having done something quiet and wrong in a room full of people who would remember it. He had pulled up the building's tenant and owner database at 117. It was a system he had access to for legitimate security reasons, verifying business identities, confirming authorized access for contractors, running names on flagged individuals. He typed the name the way he had written it in the log, Wilhelmina Drake. He had expected nothing, or something minor, or the name of a tenant in one of the upper floor offices who had come to the wrong floor by accident. He had been prepared for almost any result except the one that loaded on his screen in 8 seconds. The screen showed a property ownership record, cross-referenced with the building management system. The name at the top of the record was the name he had typed. The property listed beneath that name was the building he was sitting in at this exact moment. Not a unit in the building, not a leasehold in the building. The building, the full parcel, the deed holder. Principal owner of record, Drake Property Group, represented by Wilhelmina A. Drake, sole founding member. Theodore Grant read the record from top to bottom. Then he read it again from the top. The fluorescent panel in the third position from the left flickered once, held, and flickered again. He thought about the marble floor upstairs. He thought about the way she had walked across it. He thought about the leather document folder under her arm, and the fact that she had never once raised her voice, or explained herself, or offered a single word of context to the woman pointing a finger at her. And he understood now, with the cold, full-body clarity of a man who has made an error that cannot be quietly corrected. He understood why she had not needed to explain herself. She had simply needed to leave, because everything else was already in motion before she ever reached the door. Theodore Grant sat with that understanding for a long moment. The overhead fluorescence buzzed. The third panel flickered. Somewhere in the building above him, Evangeline Moss was laughing on a phone, describing a turnkey property on Ashford Lane, utterly unaware that the floor beneath her feet had already shifted. Theodore Grant reached across the desk. He picked up the phone. He held it in his hand for a moment, not yet dialing, looking at the screen with the record still loaded. Wilhelmina Drake's name sitting at the top of the page with the patient permanence of something that had always been true and had simply been waiting for the right person to look. Then he dialed. Rosalind Obie's car turned onto Whitmore Lane while the dew was still on the hedges. The house at the end of the lane, pale stone and tall windows, was already lit from the inside, not with lamps but with the morning itself. Wilhelmina Drake's clerestory windows pulling the sun straight down into every room. The neighbors had always thought the design strange. Wilhelmina thought it practical. She disliked working in the dark. Rosalind knocked twice and let herself in with the key she'd carried for 11 years. She was 44, in an orange blazer buttoned to the top, with a laptop and 2 external drives under one arm and a 2-inch binder under the other. She had been at her office until past midnight assembling it, and it showed only in her eyes, which were sharper than they should have been at this hour. Wilhelmina was already at the mahogany desk in the central office, blue jacket on the back of her chair, white blouse, reading glasses on, a legal pad open at her elbow. The skylight above her was at full strength, the light landing on the desk, with a clarity Wilhelmina had paid a great deal of money to engineer. When Rosalind came in, she finished the page she was on before raising her eyes. Her expression was patient, in the way of someone whose patience has finally been rewarded. "Tell me you have the deed on top," she said. Rosalind unclipped the binder and turned to the first tab. "Hargrove Tower, filed 1998. Your name on the title, no co-signatory." She slid it across. Wilhelmina glanced down, nodded once, set it aside. The laptop on the corner of the desk chimed, and Cyrus Drake appeared on the screen. 48, green shirt. The blue jacket hung over the chair behind him, plainly unworn, because he had been at his desk since before dawn. His own legal pad was in front of him, covered in handwriting so tight it looked drafted rather than written. He pushed up his glasses and went straight in. "Morning, Ma." Warm, but already half on his notes. "Rosalind, the franchise agreement first. That's the spine of all 3 instruments I'm filing. Tab 4. She held it up for him on camera, then handed it across to Wilhelmina. Pinnacle Realty's operating license was issued in 2009 under a franchise agreement with Drake Property Group. Standard renewal clause, annual discretionary, at the parent entity's option. That's you, Ma." She used the word the way Cyrus did, and had used it that way for years. Wilhelmina read the agreement slowly, paragraph by paragraph, the way she read everything, even when she had drafted better versions of it herself years before. When she put it down, she said, "Renewal is due in 43 days. Cyrus made a mark on his pad, which means the review I'm filing today lands inside the active term. Cleaner than I hoped." "Every lease she touched," Wilhelmina said, still looking at the page. "I want them listed." Rosalind already had the directory open. She turned the laptop so all 3 of them could see it. Evangeline Moss's name appeared on 31 lease transactions across 4 years, every one of them routed through Pinnacle Realty's brokerage arm and booked through Hargrove Commercial Holdings, a Drake Property Group subsidiary. Every commission Evangeline had ever drawn out of that building had passed through a structure Wilhelmina owned. Every client she had charmed in that marble lobby had signed paper with Wilhelmina's institutional fingerprint on it. There was a silence in the room, the particular silence of something enormous becoming visible for the first time to people who already knew it was enormous. Then Cyrus exhaled slowly through his nose. 31 transactions, he said. 4 years, 31 opportunities to check who she was working for, Rosalind said. Her voice was precise, not cruel, precise. Wilhelmina took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk. "The footage," she said, "requested at 7:15 this morning through building management," Rosalind confirmed. "We control the security system. I'll have the full lobby feed, all 4 angles, time-stamped by noon." She paused. "Theodore Grant is listed as the responding officer on the incident log. His radio call is part of the recording." Wilhelmina said nothing to that. She simply picked up her glasses again and put them back on. The next hour was the most procedurally satisfying hour any of the 3 of them had experienced in recent memory. And all 3 of them would quietly admit that in different ways afterward. Rosalind pulled Evangeline Moss's employment file, her real estate license number, issued by the state board, tied to her Pinnacle affiliation, her commission history by year, broken into quarters, her performance record, which included 2 client complaints that had been internally resolved and never escalated. Resolved, Cyrus noted on his legal pad, by a regional director who had no authority to suppress a state board-level complaint, which meant those complaints were now material. Cyrus drafted the first instrument on camera, reading it aloud as he wrote it. A formal notice to the State Real Estate Board, requesting a review of Evangeline Moss's license, citing the documented incident, the employment record, the suppressed complaints, and the building's own security footage as supporting evidence. He was methodical, and he was thorough, and he did not raise his voice once. He didn't need to. The document raised its own voice simply by existing. The second instrument was the formal lease audit notice to Pinnacle Realty's regional director, Raymond Whitfield, a 62-page request for a full accounting of every transaction processed under the Pinnacle franchise since 2019, with a 48-hour response window. Cyrus read the opening paragraph aloud and then looked at the camera. "This is the one that freezes everything," he said. "When Whitfield reads this, he can't authorize a new listing, can't close a pending deal, can't process a commission until the audit is complete. Drake Property Group has that authority under Section 9 of the franchise agreement." Rosalind pointed at tab 4 on the desk, the franchise agreement she had set in front of Wilhelmina 40 minutes ago. "Section 9, she confirmed. Wilhelmina looked at her son through the screen. "Send it certified. Physical and electronic. Both already printing," Cyrus said. The third instrument was different. The first two were legal machinery, precise, necessary, and cold, in the way that documents are cold when they contain too much power to need emotion. The third one was something else. Cyrus had framed the parameters, but he had not drafted it. He was not supposed to draft it. This one was not from a lawyer. This one was from Wilhelmina Drake. She picked up her pen. Rosalind had already prepared the client list, 29 names and contact details, drawn from the lobby sign-in records for Tuesday morning, the records Pinnacle Realty kept as a routine matter, and that Drake Property Group had every right to access as the franchising entity. The 30th was the young couple whose contact information had come from the building's own visitor log. The 30th and 1st was someone Rosalind had flagged separately, and she slid that name across the desk without a word. Amara Patel, junior agent, Pinnacle Realty, present in the lobby at the time of the incident. Wilhelmina looked at the name. "She's inside," she said. "Not a question. She ran a search on you within 90 minutes of the incident," Rosalind said. "The building's network log shows the query came from a Pinnacle workstation." Wilhelmina set the name aside, not discarded, set aside, and began to write. The letter took 22 minutes. It was addressed not to Pinnacle Realty, not to the regional director, not to any institution. It was addressed to the people who had been in that lobby. It named the morning plainly. It described what they had witnessed without dramatizing it and without asking them to feel a particular way about it. It explained in plain language who Wilhelmina Drake was and what her relationship to that building and that firm had always been. It told them they deserved to know. It told them she was committed to ensuring that every active transaction they had in progress would be honored and protected through the transition period. It told them she was sorry they had seen what they saw, not because she was ashamed, but because no one who came to that office to build a future deserved to begin that process by watching someone be humiliated for the color of her skin and the number of her years. She did not write the last sentence. She thought it. She let it live in the space between every sentence she did write. That was enough. That was more than enough. Cyrus was quiet on the screen when she finished reading it aloud. Rosalind had stopped moving. The skylight above the desk held the mid-morning sun steady and clean, and the room was very still. Wilhelmina Drake uncapped her pen, moved to the bottom of the last page, and signed her name in the same deliberate cursive she had used to sign the deed to Hargrove Tower 26 years ago. She set the pen down. She looked at the signature for one moment. Then she looked up. "Send it," she said. The machinery was in motion. Raymond Whitfield had a system. He had operated by it for 22 years as Pinnacle Realty's regional director, and it had never failed him. Coffee first, black, 2 sugars, from the machine in the second-floor break room, then the window. He would stand at the glass and look out at Hargrove Tower, catching the early morning light while the day organized itself in his mind before he touched a single document. It was a ritual. It was also, on this particular Wednesday morning, about to become the last peaceful moment he would have for a very long time. He set his coffee on the corner of his mahogany desk and loosened his blue jacket as he settled into his chair. The morning skylight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows at a clean white angle, washing the office in the kind of brightness that usually made Raymond feel capable. He noticed the certified letter first, then the legal notice beside it, the Pinnacle Realty letterhead facing up with a seal he had never seen affixed to correspondence addressed to him before. Then he noticed his phone screen, dark and face down, and when he flipped it over, he counted 3 missed calls from a 614 area code he recognized as the State Real Estate Board. Raymond Whitfield sat very still for 4 seconds. Then he reached for the certified letter. He read it slowly, which was unusual for him. Raymond was a fast reader, but this document required rereading because his brain refused to process it at normal speed. The words Lease Audit Notice and Drake Property Group Subsidiary and all active listings pending review kept sliding past his comprehension like they were written in a language he almost spoke. He set the letter down. He picked up the legal notice. He read the phrase operating license under formal review, effective upon receipt, and felt the blood leave his face in a single efficient wave. He called the State Real Estate Board at 7:51 a.m. The woman who answered was polite. She was also completely immovable. She confirmed that Pinnacle Realty's operating license had been placed under formal review as of the previous evening. She confirmed that all new listings were frozen, pending outcome of the review. She confirmed that the review had been initiated at the request of Drake Property Group, the parent entity under whose franchise agreement Pinnacle Realty operated. She offered to connect him with the assigned review officer. Raymond said yes without knowing he had said it. He stood at his window while he waited on hold. Hargrove Tower rose from the downtown block directly in his sightline, its glass face blazing in the morning skylight, each floor catching the light at a slightly different angle so the whole building seemed to be quietly, methodically illuminated from the inside out. Raymond Whitfield had looked at that tower from this window for 11 years. He had sold listings in it. He had closed deals in its lobby. He had congratulated his agents on their commission checks drawn from leases negotiated in its conference rooms. He had walked its marble floors every Tuesday morning without once asking who those floors belonged to. He understood now, with a clarity that arrived the way bad news always arrives, completely and all at once, that he was staring at the building that owned him. The review officer came on the line and confirmed everything the first woman had said, with additional detail Raymond wished he could unhear. He thanked her. He ended the call. He stood at the window for another 45 seconds, then turned and told his assistant to find Evangeline Moss and bring her to his office immediately. Evangeline arrived 8 minutes later in a cream blazer and tailored ivory slacks, her hair exact, her expression carrying the particular confidence of someone who had not yet been told the morning's agenda. She closed the door behind her and smiled with half her mouth. Raymond did not smile back. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and waited until she sat before he said a single word. He did not ease into it. He did not preface it with context or soften the architecture of what he was about to say. He picked up the certified letter and read it to her. He read the legal notice. He read the specific language from his call with the board: license under formal review, listings frozen, parent entity initiated. Then he set both documents flat on the desk between them and looked at her. Evangeline's face moved through its stages quickly enough that Raymond caught each one. Disbelief came first, sharp and reflexive, her head pulling back a fraction, as if the words had a mild physical force. Then the second stage arrived, the forced dismissal, the small, almost laugh, the recalibration toward certainty that this was some administrative error, some confusion of names, something that would resolve itself by noon. She opened her mouth to say exactly that. Raymond slid his phone across the desk before she could speak. The screen showed the Drake Property Group asset portfolio, pulled from a business registry he had accessed 20 minutes ago while waiting on hold. Hargrove Tower was listed third. Full title, clear deed, owner of record for 31 years. He watched her read it. He watched her read it a second time. He said, "The woman you had escorted out of this building yesterday morning is Wilhelmina Drake. She is the founder of Drake Property Group. The marble floor you walked across to point at her is her floor. The operating license that allows every agent in this office to list a single property runs through a franchise agreement with her company, renewable at her discretion. Every lease you have ever signed as a Pinnacle agent was routed through a Drake subsidiary. The building Pinnacle Realty has operated inside for the past 11 years belongs to her." He paused to let that settle. Then he said, "She knows your name, she has the security footage, and her son is a corporate attorney." The second stage collapsed. The forced dismissal crumbled at its foundation, and what came through the wreckage was something Raymond had never seen on Evangeline Moss's face before. It was small and real and unmistakably afraid. Her jaw held, her spine held, but her eyes changed. The particular change that happens when a person finally calculates the true size of what they have stepped into, and the number does not resolve. Raymond picked up both documents and placed them in a folder without looking at her again. He said he needed to make calls. He said she should contact her personal attorney. He said the word immediately and meant it in every direction. Evangeline Moss left his office without speaking. Across the city, in a light-filled home office under a wide natural skylight, Rosalind Obie sat at a long work table with her laptop open, her orange blazer precise, a printed contact list beside her left hand, and a legal pad beside her right. She had been at the table since 6:30. She had already confirmed the board notification, verified the document delivery to Raymond Whitfield's office, and cross-referenced the building management system's client log against the list of 30 individuals present in the Pinnacle Realty lobby on Tuesday morning. Now she began to call them. Her voice was professional, warm, and exact. She introduced herself as Rosalind Obie, Chief of Operations for Drake Property Group. She explained, briefly and without embellishment, that they had been present during an incident at Pinnacle Realty the previous morning involving the firm's founder and primary property owner, Wilhelmina Drake. She noted that the firm was aware of what occurred and that appropriate action was being taken. She informed each person that they would receive a personal call from Wilhelmina Drake directly, and that any concerns regarding their active transactions or lease arrangements would be addressed by Drake Property Group with full priority. She was courteous. She was precise. She allowed no question to go unanswered and raised no voice. She worked through the list with the same methodical steadiness she had brought to every task for Wilhelmina Drake over the past 23 years, and she did not stop until every name had been reached. 9 of the 30 called back before she had finished the list. Evangeline Moss did not go back to her desk. She walked through the open floor of Pinnacle Realty with her eyes forward, past Amara Patel, who was at her workstation and who looked up with an expression that contained too much knowledge for Evangeline to process. She walked past the reception desk and the glass entrance and the elevator bank, and she took the elevator down to the parking garage beneath Hargrove Tower. The fluorescents overhead buzzed in their familiar low register, that flat institutional hum that she had never once noticed in 11 years of walking through this garage. She noticed it now. The light they produced was merciless, overhead even, washing the concrete ceiling and the low painted pillars in white, with no dimension and no softness. She found her car. She got in. She closed the door. She sat with both hands on the steering wheel and stared at the concrete wall ahead of her. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. A client with an active listing she had been scheduled to finalize that afternoon. She had spoken to this client 4 times in the past 2 weeks. She knew the property address by memory. She knew the buyer's pre-approval amount and the closing timeline, and the specific counter they had agreed upon last Friday. She could not legally answer the call. The license suspension notice had arrived in her email at 8:47 a.m., 14 minutes after she had sat in Raymond Whitfield's office and read the asset portfolio on his phone screen. It was formal, documented, effective immediately, with a case number and a contact at the board and a paragraph at the bottom, outlining the review process in language that was courteous and absolute. The phone continued ringing. She watched it ring. Above her, above the concrete ceiling of the parking garage, above the lobby floor, with its marble surface she had walked across 1,000 times without asking whose name was on the deed, above the floors of Hargrove Tower, rising through the morning air, the machinery that Wilhelmina Drake had set in motion the previous afternoon continued its work without interruption, precise, documented, patient, just like the woman who built it. Evangeline Moss sat in the fluorescent buzz of the parking garage with her hands on the wheel and her listings frozen and her phone ringing, and for the first time in her professional life, she had absolutely nothing to say. The morning came in clean and bright, natural skylight pouring through the tall windows of Wilhelmina Drake's home office and spreading across the mahogany desk in long, warm panels. It was 8:47 a.m. She had slept exactly 6 hours, risen at 5, made coffee she barely touched, and spent the next 3 hours reviewing the list that Rosalind Obi had compiled the night before. 30 names, 30 people who had been standing in that lobby when Evangeline Moss raised her finger and opened her mouth. 30 people who had watched a 74-year-old woman be spoken to like debris tracked in from a sidewalk. Wilhelmina Drake had read each name carefully, the way she read every document, not quickly, not impatiently, but with the full weight of her attention. She had written a short note beside each one. Then she had set her coffee down, picked up the phone, and begun. The first call she made was to a woman named Dorothea Sims, 71 years old, retired schoolteacher, 32 years in the Hargrove Unified School District. Rosalind's notes said she had been at Pinnacle Realty to sign the lease on her very first investment property, a small commercial unit on the east corridor of Hargrove Tower that she had saved 11 years to afford. Wilhelmina Drake let the phone ring 3 times before Dorothea Sims picked up, her voice cautious and thin, the voice of someone who had been rehearsing how to sound if anyone called. "Mrs. Sims," Wilhelmina Drake said. "My name is Wilhelmina Drake. You were at Pinnacle Realty yesterday morning. I was the woman they asked to leave." There was a silence so full it had texture. Then Dorothea Sims said, "I know who you are." And her voice broke in the middle of it, quiet and sudden, like a scene giving way. She said she had been shaking so badly during the ejection that she had knocked her own folder off the chair reaching for her coat. She said she had walked out of Pinnacle Realty 15 minutes after Wilhelmina Drake did, unable to complete the signing, her hands still unsteady. She said she had almost called her daughter to tell her the whole investment idea was a mistake, that maybe a woman like her had no business signing leases in buildings like that. Wilhelmina Drake listened to every word without interrupting. Then she said, "Dorothea, that lease is yours. You earned it, and the unit will be ready for you. I will personally see to it." Another silence. Then a breath, long and slow, like someone setting down a weight they had been carrying since yesterday morning. Dorothea Sims said thank you so many times that Wilhelmina Drake had to gently end the call, and even then the woman was still speaking, her voice warming, steadying, filling back out into something that sounded like dignity restored. The second call was to Marcus and Priya Ellison, a young couple in their early 30s, first-time homebuyers. Rosalind's notes said they had been seated directly across from the reception desk when the scene unfolded. Front row, no way to look away. Marcus Ellison picked up, and his wife was clearly beside him because Wilhelmina Drake could hear the low murmur of background consultation. He was polite but measured. The politeness of a man who had already had a difficult conversation with his wife about whether to walk away from the deal entirely. He said they liked the home. He said they had worked 2 years toward the down payment. He said what happened yesterday had made them question whether the people handling their transaction had the kind of judgment they needed to trust with the biggest financial decision of their lives. Wilhelmina Drake did not rush past that concern. She sat with it, the sunlight falling across her hands where they rested on the desk. She said his concern was not only reasonable, it was correct. She said the agent who behaved that way the previous morning would not be serving clients in that building going forward. She told him, in precise and measured terms, that the review of Pinnacle Realty's operating license was already in motion, and that his transaction would be handled with full documentation and oversight at every step. Marcus Ellison was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Are you really the one who owns the building?" And Wilhelmina Drake said, simply, "I am." He called his wife's name softly, away from the phone. When he came back, he said they would stay with the process. He thanked her. She told him congratulations on their first home, and meant it. The third name on the list was Gordon Ashby, commercial developer, mid-50s, 3 active contracts running through Pinnacle Realty simultaneously. Rosalind had flagged him with a small asterisk, and the note, "likely to move fast." She was right. Wilhelmina Drake had not yet finished her second sentence when Gordon Ashby said, in the careful and level tone of a man who had already been on a call with his own attorney that morning, that he needed to understand exactly what the status of his existing contracts was before the conversation went any further. No judgment in his voice, no dramatics, just a businessman protecting his position. Wilhelmina Drake respected it completely. She told him his active contracts were not voidable by the license review. They were routed through a Drake Property Group subsidiary and would remain legally intact. She told him that if he chose to transfer management of future contracts to a Drake Property Group direct entity, that option would be available to him by end of week. He asked who his contact would be. She gave him Rosalind Obi's name and direct line. He wrote it down. She could hear the pen. He said, "Mrs. Drake, I want you to know what I saw yesterday morning was wrong." She said she appreciated him saying so. He said he should have said something in the moment and hadn't. She said the call he was making now was enough. The fourth call was the one she had been turning over in her mind since she saw the name. Reginald Okafor, 81 years old, a retired civil engineer who had lived in Hargrove for 53 years. Rosalind's notes said he had been seated near the glass windows along the east wall, waiting on a property valuation. The note said one more thing, marked carefully in Rosalind's handwriting. "He recognized you when you walked in." He picked up on the first ring, as though he had been sitting with the phone in his hand. His first words were, "Wilhelmina, it's Reggie." His voice was the voice of a man in his 80s who had survived enough to know what shame felt like in the chest. Heavy, particular, impossible to reason away. He said he had seen her the moment she came through the glass door. Said he knew exactly who she was. Said he had sat there and watched everything happen and had not stood up, had not spoken, had not done a single thing except look down at the floor when Theodore Grant appeared, because he had told himself it wasn't his place and that she would handle it, and that telling himself that had not helped him sleep 1 hour the previous night. His voice cracked near the end of it. Not dramatically, not a performance, just the hairline fracture of an old man who had watched something wrong happen and had done the ordinary human gutting thing of letting it pass. Wilhelmina Drake let the silence breathe for a moment. Then she said, "Reggie, I have known you since 1987. Your silence does not change that, and it does not change anything that matters. You are forgiven. That is done." He didn't say anything for a few seconds. She could hear him breathing. Then he said, "You were always the same, Wilhelmina. Always the same." She told him to take care of himself, and she meant that too. The fifth call did not come from Wilhelmina Drake. It came in at 11:14 a.m. While Wilhelmina Drake was reviewing the next set of names, the phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered it. The voice on the other end was young, professional in its effort to stay steady, and identifiable within 2 sentences. Amara Patel, junior agent at Pinnacle Realty. She said she knew this call was likely unexpected. She said she had been one of the people present in the lobby, and she had done the thing she should not have done. She had recognized something was wrong, and she had stayed silent. She said she had Googled Wilhelmina Drake's name while Evangeline Moss was still laughing across the room, and she had seen the photo and the journal cover and the portfolio, and she had sat at her desk and said nothing because she hadn't known what to do. And now she had been sitting with that for 36 hours, and she could not sit with it any longer. Amara Patel said she was prepared to provide a formal witness statement. She said she had her own contemporaneous notes from the morning, time-stamped on her work phone. She said she understood if this came at a cost to her position at the firm, and she was prepared to accept that. Wilhelmina Drake listened to all of it. Then she said, "Amara, write the statement. Send it to Rosalind Obi. And when this settles, I'd like to speak with you about what comes next." There was a pause on the line, the particular pause of a young woman recalibrating what she thought the conversation was going to cost her. Amara Patel said, "Yes, ma'am." She said it like someone stepping onto solid ground. While the calls continued through the afternoon, a courier arrived at the offices of the Hargrove City desk, where Claudette Ferris worked. Brown envelope, hand addressed, no return name. Claudette Ferris opened it at her desk, under the overhead fluorescence, and found a USB drive, a printed document record running 47 pages, and a handwritten note on cream paper in a hand she had recognized for 40 years. She read the note once, then she plugged in the drive and opened the security footage. She watched it through to the end. Then she watched it again. Then she picked up the phone and called her editor. And when he answered, she said, "Clear the front. I need the lead." Wilhelmina Drake made her final call at 4:33 p.m. She set the phone down on the desk and looked out the window. Across the skyline, catching the low gold-edged light of a late afternoon in Hargrove, Hargrove Tower stood exactly where she had placed it. Solid, documented, fully hers. She did not feel rage. She had not felt rage once in 24 hours. She felt the deep, quiet, unassailable thing that comes from knowing the record is complete. The witnesses are speaking, and the truth has already been sent to the right person with a 47-page attachment and a handwritten note. She opened the next file on her desk and got back to work. The article went live at exactly 6:03 in the morning. No dramatic press conference. No leaked tip that sent reporters scrambling. Just Claudette Ferris at her desk in a blue jacket. The overhead fluorescence of the newsroom cutting a sharp, clean light across her keyboard, hitting publish on a piece she had spent the last 36 hours building like a courthouse, stone by stone, document by document, unassailable. The headline sat there on the screen like a sentence handed down by a court that never needed to raise its voice. Real estate agent ejected property empire founder from building she owns. Here is the security footage. 14 words. Every one of them true, every one of them documented. By 6:17, the article had 4,000 views. By 6:45, it had 30,000. The security footage embedded at the top of the page did what no amount of editorial framing could have achieved on its own. It simply showed the truth, and the truth was worse than anyone reading the headline had imagined. The lobby of Hargrove Tower, overhead fluorescence blazing across white marble, every camera angle sharp and merciless, capturing Evangeline Moss in her cream blazer, with one finger extended like a weapon, her mouth moving in words that the accompanying transcript made brutally readable. Clients frozen mid-handshake. Junior agents pressed back against their desks, and Wilhelmina Drake, 74 years old, blue jacket pressed, leather document folder tucked under her arm, standing perfectly still with the patience of a woman who had spent 40 years being underestimated by people who had not done their homework. That was what destroyed people. Not the pointing, not the shouting. It was Wilhelmina Drake's face in the final 7 seconds before she turned toward the door. Calm, unreadable, carrying something in her eyes that no caption could name, but every viewer understood immediately. It was the look of a woman who already knew exactly what was going to happen next. By 8 a.m., the local news had the story on 3 separate channels, each one running the lobby footage on a split screen beside a photograph of Wilhelmina Drake from a 2019 Business Journal cover. The headline of that issue reading, "Hargrove's Quiet Giant: How Wilhelmina Drake Built an Empire Nobody Saw Coming." The anchors spoke carefully. Their lawyers had presumably advised them to. But careful language could not soften what the footage showed, and the footage was everywhere. National outlets picked it up before 10 a.m. By that point, Cyrus Drake was already at the family's legal office on the 14th floor of a building 3 blocks from Hargrove Tower, fielding calls. He was in his green top, sleeves rolled up to the forearm, a legal pad at his elbow, and a phone in each hand, moving through each inquiry with the measured precision of a man who had been raised in his mother's office and knew exactly how much to say and when to stop saying it. He confirmed facts. He declined speculation. When one national anchor asked him how his mother was feeling, Cyrus Drake paused, looked directly into the camera, and said, "My mother is working. She has always been working. That part of the story hasn't changed." He moved to the next call before the anchor could follow up. At Pinnacle Realty's regional headquarters, Raymond Whitfield had drafted and redrafted the corporate statement 4 times before his communications director finally told him that no version was going to satisfy the public, and the best they could do was release something honest and brief. What they released was neither. The statement described the incident as an unfortunate miscommunication and extended sincere regrets to all parties. It contained 4 paragraphs and managed to avoid saying Wilhelmina Drake's name even once. Within 20 minutes of publication, the statement had been screenshotted by 11,000 people and was being dissected in real time across every platform. The comments were not charitable. A communications consultant appearing on one cable segment held the statement up on camera and said quietly, "This is what a company looks like when it doesn't understand what it has done." She set the paper down and did not say anything further. Evangeline Moss made her move at 11:47 a.m. Later, people would debate what she had been thinking. Her attorney would later describe it as a moment of poor judgment under extreme stress. Viewers would describe it in terms considerably less forgiving. What she did was open her personal social media account, 14,000 followers, largely built on curated photographs of luxury listings and motivational captions about hustle, and post a statement calling the coverage exaggerated and agenda-driven, claiming the footage had been taken out of context, and describing herself as someone who had dedicated years to serving this community with integrity. It was screenshotted within 40 seconds. Within 4 minutes, the screenshot was on 3 national news feeds. Within 11 minutes, it had been quoted back to her in full by a verified account with 6 million followers. Within the hour, the phrase "out of context" had become its own separate news story, with journalists pulling the full unedited footage and replaying it in slow motion, time-stamped, with the transcript overlaid. There was no context missing. There never had been. The footage was 4 minutes and 22 seconds long, and it showed everything. The social media post came down at 1:15 p.m. Its removal was also screenshotted. That screenshot spread faster than the original. At 2 p.m., Pastor Solomon Bryce sat in the studio of a local news affiliate, wearing a dark suit, his hands folded on the desk in front of him. the studio lights overhead catching the silver at his temples. He did not speak in abstractions. He did not offer generalities about dignity or community spirit. He spoke in specifics, and the specifics were the most powerful thing anyone said on camera that day. He named the 12-unit apartment building on Decker Street that had been set for demolition in 1998. Wilhelmina Drake purchased it, renovated it, and leased every unit to long-term residents at rates that hadn't been adjusted to squeeze them out. He named the community meeting hall on Ellison Avenue that she had quietly underwritten after the previous owner folded during a rough financial year. He named 3 small business owners, a tailor, a pharmacist, a woman who ran an after-school tutoring center, who had each been leased commercial space through Drake Property Group subsidiary at terms that made their businesses possible when every private landlord they approached had turned them away. "I have known Wilhelmina Drake for 31 years, Pastor Solomon Bryce said, looking directly into the camera with a steadiness that required no rehearsal. "She has never once needed anyone to defend her character. I am not here to defend it. I am here to describe it. Those are different things." The clip ran on every platform for the rest of the day. Theodore Grant gave his statement from home, standing in front of a plain wall, the morning light coming through a window behind him and falling across his face. He was in civilian clothes, a gray long-sleeved shirt, dark pants, and he looked like a man who had not slept much in 3 days. He did not read from notes. He said that on Tuesday morning he had followed the instruction of a Pinnacle Realty agent and escorted a woman from the building without asking her name, without asking her business, and without consulting the building's own ownership records first. He said there was no version of that he could defend. He said he had submitted a formal written apology to Wilhelmina Drake personally, and that she had accepted it, and that her acceptance had been more generous than he had deserved. He said, "I am 53 years old, and I have worked in building security for 22 years. I knew the moment I touched that woman's elbow that something was wrong. I should have stopped. I didn't stop. That's mine to carry." He did not elaborate further. He did not need to. His statement was brief and unembellished, and it was believed completely because of both of those qualities. By 4 p.m., Wilhelmina Drake's name had been searched more than 2 million times. The 2019 Business Journal profile had crashed its host server twice and been re-uploaded to 4 mirror sites. Drake Property Group's archived public filings, the building permits, the acquisition records, the corporate registration documents, were being cited in comment sections by people who had spent their lunch breaks reading through them. The story was no longer a story about a real estate agent. It had become something larger, a conversation about what power looks like when it is quiet, and what contempt costs when it is directed at the wrong person, and what 40 years of documented, unimpeachable work looks like when it finally has to stand in the light. Evangeline Moss sat in her apartment at 5:30 in the afternoon. Natural daylight poured through the large window above her dining table, filling the room with the flat, indifferent brightness of a clear afternoon that had no interest in her distress. Her phone screen showed her social media accounts suspended for policy violations following the mass reports generated by the original post's fallout. Her email showed 3 client inquiries from the morning marked as withdrawn. A 4th client had left a voicemail she had not yet listened to. Her license status on the State Real Estate Board's public portal still showed the red banner it had shown since yesterday. Under formal review, no new transactions authorized. Her attorney had called twice. She had called back once, and the conversation had been short and had not made her feel better. She was not processing rage anymore. Rage had a shape, an edge, something to push against. What she was sitting with now was structureless and far more difficult. The slow comprehension that there was no version of the next chapter of her professional life that looked like the one she had been living. The marble floor she had walked on every morning, the listings she had built her identity around, the building that had been the backdrop of every client meeting, every closing photograph, Every piece of personal branding she had ever created, all of it had belonged to Wilhelmina Drake, had always belonged to Wilhelmina Drake. While Evangeline Moss had been celebrating in the lobby, the woman she had dismissed as a wandering stranger had been sitting in a sunlit home office, pulling 40 years of proof from an archive that Evangeline Moss had never known existed, and setting into motion a reckoning that no social media post, no corporate statement, and no attorney's retainer was going to stop. Outside Evangeline Moss's window, the city moved in the afternoon light, indifferent and continuing, the way cities always do. Wilhelmina Drake was already on to the next file. 10 days. That was all it took for 40 years of careful, documented ownership to do what it had always been built to do, which was hold. On the 11th morning, Wilhelmina Drake got dressed. She had pressed her blue jacket the night before, the way she did before any meeting that mattered. Her black shoes had been polished. The leather folder she had been carrying since this whole thing started was sitting where she had left it on the desk. She picked it up, tucked it under her arm, and walked out into a bright spring morning. She drove herself. No entourage, no camera crew, no statement prepared for the sidewalk. Just a 74-year-old woman, founder of Drake Property Group, sole owner of Hargrove Tower, walking up to the front doors of a building she had imagined onto a bare concrete lot 30 years ago. The lobby looked the same as ever. White fluorescents in clean rows above the vaulted ceiling, morning sun coming through the glass and laying gold bands across the marble. It was quieter than it had been 10 days before. The Pinnacle Realty signage on the east wall was gone. You could still see the bolt holes faintly in the paint, like the outline of something that had thought it was permanent. The young woman at reception looked up, stood, and didn't say a word. Wilhelmina nodded back, warmly enough, and kept walking. The Pinnacle franchise agreement had been terminated 7 days earlier. The paperwork was clean. Cyrus had handled it himself, the way he had handled most things since the Tuesday night he sat at the kitchen table at age 11 and watched his mother renegotiate a bank loan. Drake Property Group would open its own full-service office in this space before the end of the quarter. The desks were on order. The licensing was filed. Amara Patel had accepted the first associate position 2 days ago. She had called Rosalind to accept, voice unsteady, and Rosalind had told her to be ready to work hard and to treat every client as though they might own the building. Amara laughed at that, the relieved kind, and said she understood the lesson better than most. Evangeline Moss's real estate license had been suspended for 18 months pending the full board review. She had hired a lawyer. She was contesting the findings. When a reporter asked Cyrus for his response to the legal challenge, he straightened his collar, looked into the camera, and said, "She should try." Raymond Whitfield had announced his early retirement the previous Friday. His statement was brief and said almost nothing, which was, in its own way, a confession. Rosalind was waiting at the elevator bank when Wilhelmina got there. Blazer pressed, tablet under her arm, with the composed look that meant everything had been handled and she just wanted to be present for this. They didn't speak. Rosalind pressed the button. The doors opened and they got in. They went to the 3rd floor first, the future offices. Wilhelmina walked the empty space slowly, shoes quiet on the bare floor, the fluorescents humming above her. She paused at the east-facing window and looked out at the city for a long time. She didn't need to say anything. Then up to the 7th, the 9th, the 12th. She walked each one. She wasn't inspecting. Every floor had a history only she carried. The negotiation that made it possible. The contractor going bankrupt halfway through the 2nd year. The morning she signed the final deed with a pen that ran dry halfway through her signature. And she laughed and asked for another. Cyrus was already on the rooftop terrace when they got up there. He had taken the stairs. He always took the stairs. Said they helped him think. He was standing near the north edge with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the skyline with an expression Wilhelmina knew well enough because it was her own. The city ran out in every direction below them, glass and steel catching the late light, the sky above it cloudless. She walked over. Rosalind stepped up on her left. None of them spoke for a while, and there was no particular reason to. Wilhelmina Drake was the one who broke the silence. She did not look at the cameras. There were no cameras. She did not speak to the press or to any audience beyond the two people standing at her sides. She spoke quietly, the way a person speaks when the words are meant to last, rather than to travel. She said that she had stood on this roof before it was a roof. She said she had stood on a slab of poured concrete in the rain on a Thursday afternoon in the early 90s and looked out at this exact skyline and made a decision that every person around her at the time told her was a mistake. She said that the building behind her was not built to make her rich, though it had. It was built to prove that someone who looked like her, who was told at every turn that the door was not for her, could not only walk through that door but could own the frame it hung in, the floor beneath it, and the sky above it. She said that what had happened 10 days ago in the lobby below them was not the first time someone had looked at her and not seen what was actually there. It would likely not be the last, but she said this building, every lease, every deed, every notarized document in Rosalind's archive was the answer to every one of those moments. Not her anger, not her grievance. The work, the 40 years of signed, witnessed, documented, undeniable work. She said she wanted the new office on the 3rd floor to represent that. She wanted every client who walked through those doors, every first-time buyer, every small business owner trying to find space in a city that kept raising its prices, to be treated as if they might own the building. Because one day, if they did the work and someone believed in them, they might. Cyrus Drake put his hand over his mother's. Rosalind Obie pressed her lips together and looked out at the skyline so that neither of them would see her face. The three of them stood there in the morning light for another full minute, the city turning slowly below them, in the way cities do when they are completely indifferent to the extraordinary things happening inside them. Then Wilhelmina Drake straightened her blue jacket, tucked her leather document folder more firmly under her arm, and turned toward the elevator. She was back at her desk by noon. The skylight above her home office filled the room with clean, direct light, no shadows, no dimness, just the kind of clarity that makes every document on a mahogany desk look like evidence of something real. The archive was behind her, 40 years of it, digitized by Rosalind and cataloged by category and date. Every file named and cross-referenced and backed up in 3 separate locations, because Wilhelmina Drake had understood long before most people that power without documentation is just a story someone else can rewrite. She opened a new property file, a parcel on the south side of the city, underdeveloped, overlooked, the kind of lot the market had written off and the community around it had been waiting on for years. She had been watching it for 18 months. The numbers worked now. The time was right. She uncapped her pen. At the top of the document, in the space reserved for the acquiring party, she wrote her name in the same steady hand she had been signing with for 4 decades. Wilhelmina Drake. Drake Property Group. Outside, Hargrove Tower caught the afternoon light the way it always did. Glass and steel, and 40 years of proof, standing in the skyline of a city that had tried more than once to suggest there was no place for her in it. The building disagreed. So did she. And she had the documents to prove it. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.